right, Chuck. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for sitting through that intro there. How you doing today,
I
man?
heard that about Santana.
Yeah, yeah. No, Santana collapsed in Detroit. It was I was scared for him because I love Santana. Are you a fan?
Yeah, I have been, especially their set at Woodstock, which was a long time ago.
Oh
But
my God, that is amazing. Apparently, he was on some sort of illicit substance, is what I've heard. I did.
probably he and everybody else there.
Right, exactly. No, that performance at Woodstock is incredible. What's that song? I remember the first time I ever heard. Is it Jenga? Wow, what is the name of the song? It's the one where it's like Jenga, Jenga, wow, and it's just like tons of. Anyways, I'm not going to sit here and terribly sing Santana songs, but I remember seeing that song in particular and just being like, this is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. I was a young person just learning guitar on my own. When did you come into Santana?
Right about then, because I was living in San Francisco at the time,
Okay.
so they were from San Francisco, and the Fillmore was going, and the Summer of Love, and all that kind of stuff. So
Okay. So you
yeah,
got to experience that.
yeah, it was before Woodstock. Woodstock was in 1969, so yeah,
Yeah.
it was quite a summer actually.
The summer of '69. I think there's about.
Well, the summer of '67 was the summer of love in San
I
Francisco, and that
see.
was unbelievable.
Yeah. And how old were you then, if you don't mind?
I was about a senior in college.
Wow. So perfect timing. Holy
Yeah,
crap.
yeah,
What
yeah.
so what was that like? What was that like for you? I mean, like the Dead and Jefferson Airplane and Ken Kesey, all that stuff is sort of happening all around that time. What was your experience with it?
Well, that particular summer, I was between my junior and senior year in college, and so I went down to the Fillmore twice a week. And the interesting thing about that time was is the band I thought that was the best of all of them was a band called the Moby Grape.
Hmm.
And so if you get a chance to look at some of their early things, really an incredible band. Everybody wrote music, everybody played. They had three guitar players in the group, a guy that had a Viking voice that was one of the lead singers, but they all sang. And incredible band, really something else. Very good.
Wow,
Yeah.
Moby Grape, and so I've never heard of them, and like did they ever go beyond the San Francisco scene?
Oh yeah, they were on Columbia Records. They
Okay.
were yes, but they had a lot of personal issues, shall we say, and some mental illness even. Also, I think they were mishandled.
Yeah.
But yeah, for example, a person like Chrissy Hine, the Pretenders leader, that's one of her favorite albums is the Moby Grape.
Ah,
Uh, Lee Sklar, the famous studio bass player, his inspiration was Bob Mosley, who was the bass player and the singer in that band. So they're not unknown. They're one of those tragic bands that you hear about.
yeah, yeah.
Great songs and stuff. Yeah.
That seems to happen a lot. I mean, still happens a lot. It seems like mental illness runs rampant in the artist community, but but especially then, and I feel like especially in that time, everyone's sort of experimenting and everyone's sort of going out there. New frontiers in music and art are being achieved. And I feel like if you have some sort of unresolved mental illness going into a scene like that, I feel like that the drugs, the atmosphere might accentuate that. Would you agree with that?
Yes and no. I mean, I don't think mental illness was real. This was it was definitely mental illness,
Hmm.
okay, in the part of two of the people in the band.
I got
As
you.
far as the rest of it is concerned, all of us doing the drugs and everything else, and the ferment that was going on because the music was very much tied into the civil rights struggle, the anti-war movement, all of that. I mean, it was an incredible time, and the music was very much involved with that. I mean, a lot of younger people that I've taught over the years or who I've played with in bands always ask me about the 60s. And the big difference between then and now, particularly when we're talking about music, was let's take the top 40, for example. So you would have the younger bands like the Rolling Stones and the Beach Boys and the Beatles and all these groups. Then you would have Motown. Then you would have the real R&B people like Wilson Pickett and James Brown and Aretha Franklin. You know, you'd have pop stuff in there. You'd have some left field country hit. And those were all in the same top 40. And so if you were in a band back then, you played all that stuff and you listened to all of it. And it's not like that anymore. It's very much genre focused. The top 10 now is very hip hop, electronic, even with those who sing, with the exception of people like Taylor Swift and Katy Perry and now Olivia Rodrigo and Billie Eilish, you know, who I think are all excellent songwriters and excellent artists, great voices and stuff like that. But there's a real sameness to what you hear there. Now, of course, you can go anywhere now and hear anything you want because there's so many people making music of all kinds, right? Yeah. I mean, there's even an indie movement now that's enormous. And here's something for your listeners that struck me. I was asked to do a song for a person by a group called Monster. And it's a song called Hayloft. Now, this song was actually released in 2008. So that's a long time ago, right?
Right.
But it just now became this huge thing because somebody used it as a soundtrack for their video on TikTok.
Yeah.
So this band is from Vancouver, and they're actually very good. I like them. But all of a sudden, they started seeing their social media stuff just go berserk.
Right.
And so I go Spotify, and they have 340 million streams on that one song.
Yeah.
It's insanity.
Right.
And so then a buddy of mine decided to figure out, okay, how much money is that to the artist? And so you can actually go online and there's where you can figure that out.
Yeah.
It's $100,000. For 340 million streams.
Right. Yeah, and if you sold 350 million singles back in the 60s even,
oh my God.
You're a very wealthy human being depending on your contract, but
no, well that would be ridiculous because we used to talk about double and triple platinum, for example, which means 3 million.
Right.
And that was a lot of money. That's a huge hit record.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can imagine 340 million, but of course it's different. That's people listening to the track.
Right,
know?
Right.
But that's how things have changed.
Yeah, it's huge change. No, that Kate Bush's song "Running Up the Hill" that it got traction on Stranger Things, and then content creators started playing it on TikTok, and then all of a sudden now every video has "If I Could Make a Deal with God," you know, like, which I absolutely love the song, and I actually like Kate Bush beforehand. I dig the 80s a lot, but that has to be such a strange thing to walk into to get, because it was charting #1 in the UK and it was charting here in the United States. So I couldn't imagine, you know, writing a song, you know, 30 some years ago or even 10 years ago or whatever, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, now it's a hit, and it's like, what happened? Music has changed a lot. And you've maintained a career through all of this, which is absolutely amazing. And you know, how have you dealt with these changes as time has moved forward through your career? How have you dealt with these? I mean, these are extreme changes, especially in the last 20 years since Napster and iTunes and all that. How have you sort of been rolling with these changes?
Well, I actually began teaching for a while, was one thing I did.
Yeah.
You know, but it's like, I heard an interview with the Doobie Brothers, and those in your audience that might not know who they are, they were a very successful band, had many hit records in the 70s. And they were talking about how it used to be that you toured to support your new album. Now it's just the opposite. The album supports the tour.
Yeah.
Because that's how most of these bands make their money, is by touring. So you become kind of a service industry when you play music, you know. I played for a while during this time with the bass player from Incubus, who was a student of mine a long time ago.
Oh, cool.
And we made an album and played quite a bit. And it was a really great band. And we had personnel problems, and that broke up, and that sort of thing. But recently, I've just started getting back into it and hired some people to work with social media and all that sort of stuff, and did a bunch of videos and recorded a bunch of new material and all that. And I've tried to concentrate on topical things. For example, that Putin thing.
Yeah.
TikTok. Now, here's an interesting thing for your listeners as well. I posted that video, and all of a sudden it got flagged on TikTok for what they called multiple violations, and they threatened to take my account down.
Yeah, TikTok is rough like that.
Now, all the stuff, the crap they put up on that thing, and because I'm protesting this guy in Russia who's responsible for the deaths of thousands and thousands of people, including his own, and I'm the one who gets flagged.
Yeah. No, it's a really weird environment right now to try to be a content creator, to put out music, and especially if you're trying to say something, and speak out about things. It's very locked down. And TikTok is first of all, it definitely is being, the data is being collected by the Chinese government, and nothing against the Chinese people. They're wonderful people, but it's like, but the government is having access to it. They are using it for whatever reasons. It is a Chinese based company. So like the fact that it's very much locked down, and it's very, censorship is very prevalent. It's definitely one of those platforms where you have to be very careful. I follow this one girl. She's a black lady who she leans sort of to the right on some issues, and she gets all these comments where they're calling her a coon, and they're calling her, the N-word even sometimes, and she gets her account taken down if she calls it out. And it's all these white people who are calling her these things, or it's black people as well. But she's just highlighting the fact that people are calling her racist names, and TikTok is taking down her account for violations. So yeah, censorship is a very huge thing right now, and it's kind of scary. And as a creator, as a musician who speaks out on issues, I mean, how do you feel in this environment, creating, especially trying to create songs where there's a real message behind it?
Well, if you're afraid of it, then what was the reason for writing it in the first place? You have to kind of stand up. I mean, look what those people are doing over there. They're fighting for their country. I mean, and I'm going to be worried about putting a song up on TikTok. I mean, I don't worry about that kind of stuff. Yeah. I could care less, and nothing's going to happen to me. I mean, it's just aggravating because there's a lot of crap that goes up there.
Absolutely.
It's just stuff, ridiculous things. And so it was an interesting episode. And I think that the video is still up there on TikTok for some reason. I have no idea why, but they keep flagging it and they keep saying things about it. So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, no. I mean, it's very interesting to be able to talk to you because you've seen so much through it. And so you seem to be getting these social media things down. Did it take you a while to get onto it, or have you always been on top of technology as it's developed over the years?
A lot of people in my generations and the ones around have trouble with technology. I don't have trouble with it. It's just that I don't interact with it as much as, say, someone that I work with who's a lot younger than I am and has grown up with it.
Yeah.
But I made it a point to understand it. And I would say to your audience as well, that if you don't understand it, you need to get somebody to help you with that, because there's no other way to work your way through to be successful in the music business now, unless you are.
Yeah.
So recently I hired a marketing firm to do some work for me and to post things and to do some branding and all that sort of thing. And I would highly recommend it. Yeah. It's not cheap. And if you can do it yourself, even better. Right. And a lot of kids can, a lot of people can. Yeah. Obviously you see a lot of YouTube influencers, right, that make all kinds of money. And you have to find ways to monetize what you do, though. And that's the real challenge.
Yeah. Is
to find ways to do that. I mean, for example, I have a buddy of mine who has a blues band, and they're okay, and they play here and there, but they've had videos up for like 10 years of gigs they've done, say, and they're all cover tunes and some of their originals. and they get a few thousand views, but now YouTube has put ads on them. Yeah. So that means that my buddy gets money. Now, it may not be a lot, but you see what I mean? That's one form. Right. Obviously, a lot of people who write are now getting their songs into, TV and movies and commercials. Right. All that sort of stuff is fair game, and you need to look at that.
Yeah.
It's really important. See, back in the 60s, for example, nobody would allow their stuff to be in a commercial.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how different it is. A commercial, are you kidding? That's right. The enemy.
Yeah. No, I mean, even in my generation coming up in the early 2000s and, 2010s and stuff, like that generation there was still that lingering sensibility of like, if you do that, you're a sellout, like you can't put your stuff in commercials. I mean, there's the scene in Oliver Stone's movie about the Doors where Jim Morrison is like flipping out about them using "Light My Fire" on a car commercial, which whether that, I assume that happened, but I don't know. These biopics are weird, but there was this culture within music and within the music industry where if you did do that, you were a sellout. Now it's like, let's sell out. Where's that money at? Because, otherwise, where are you making the money? I mean, there's YouTube monetization. They do ads. You can, content creators can get sponsorship. I get sponsors for my YouTube, or not my YouTube, but for my podcast on the audio side. This platform right here, Twitch, allows you to monetize your channel where people can subscribe to you and tip you with money and stuff. So there's all these different ways to do it. But man, if you're not plugged into it and if you're not aware of what's going on, you are really spending a lot of time and energy and effort into what amounts to no money. And I don't know about anybody else, but I need to make money. And that's how it works. That's how it works. I'm sorry, I forgot about this question, but we had a question from the chat, and they were wondering what your opinion on Leland Sklar is.
That's a funny thing because Lee, he's been a studio player, played with all kinds of people. He's been in James Taylor's band forever. He's a really excellent musician. My own experience with him on a personal level was I hired him to do a session years and years and years ago. And it was not a good experience from my standpoint because I was producing for somebody. And it was one of those things where he was playing some music over his headphones while we were in between takes. And he'd play that music right until the count off. So, I don't know about you, but at any rate, and I had to replace his bass part as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. However, I will say he's put up some things recently. I saw them about 6 months ago. He may be still doing them where he talks about various artists that he's worked with. It's just an extemporaneous kind of chat he does, and they're really good. You can really, it's interesting to hear his interaction with all these famous musicians that he's played with.
Is he like notoriously hard to work with? Is that why?
No, I don't think so. I wouldn't say that. It just happened to be this one, and who knows? It could have been a bad morning for him. I don't know. Yeah, so I wouldn't want to cast aspersions. There's obviously a lot of people that worked with him and enjoyed it. So
yeah,
these things happen.
Yeah,
but you were talking about the Doors earlier. Here in recent years. When three of them were alive, I think isn't it Ray Manzarek died recently, the keyboard player?
I believe so, yeah.
And anyway, there was three of them left, and many opportunities came for their music to be used in commercials and such. And the drummer always nixed it to the consternation of his other two bandmates. So they always had this clash. So that went on for years, and he never did relent. He never did let the music be used.
Wow.
So
that's
yeah.
I mean, there's something to be said about that, I mean, I'm sure there was millions of dollars to be had if they would. I mean, because the Doors have such a huge catalog of hits and music and different vibes and different different atmospheres that they could set for any sort of situation. So like, there's millions of dollars on the table, and I just feel like there's something to be said about having that conviction to sort of stick by your scruples and be like, hey, I'm not going to do that. But I'm sure they're not. They didn't. I'm sure that they're not poor people. I'm sure they're wealthy and they have
No,
money. But no, they're not.
no, they are.
Yeah, yeah,
And they are. But who knows what they've done with their money
right.
over a period of time, and yeah, it's a chance to earn money. So that is a question, and you stand on one side or the other. And the drummer never, because they all had to agree in their particular case. Some other case, maybe majority would rule. Not sure. But that's an example of, no, you can't use my stuff. But of course now, I mean, Bob Dylan's done a Victoria's Secret ad, for heaven's sake.
Yeah. Well,
he sold his catalog for $400 million.
Yeah, so. Which is crazy. What do you think of that? What do you think about all these artists? Axl did the same thing. You can't use Guns N' Roses music in commercials.
I don't know. The situation where you have a lot of legacy artists like Dylan and Bruce Springsteen and David Crosby selling their catalogs is, I get it. You get to a certain point and you don't want to deal with the administration of it, hiring people to handle all that business. So you just want to cash out. You're close to the end of your life. Yeah. And, you can get, David Crosby just sold his stuff for $100 million because he couldn't tour anymore.
Oh, wow.
Because of the pandemic. And that was where he was getting most of his income because he'd blown a lot of it over the years. Yeah. So, and the artists now, kids now that are playing, the same thing happens. And you still see kids overdosing and all that sort of stuff. What was that guy, Juice something or other, the rapper?
Juice
he
WRLD.
had that, he had that Sting sample that he used in the song, and he died just after the song was a hit.
Yeah.
It still happens, but you can't blame musicians because it's happening everywhere. It's just because musicians are more famous, so you hear about it, right? But I hate this thing is there's always artists that are, taking all the drugs. I mean, are you kidding me? The opioid crisis is all over the place. It's the whole population, right?
Absolutely. No.
It's the woman vacuuming her rug during the day when she's bored out of her mind watching soap operas and taking Valium. It's the same thing, right?
Yeah, so. No, I agree. The opioid crisis, and even with the pandemic, there's been such a spike in suicides and in drug overdoses and drug addiction and mental health, obviously, that it does just sort of get focused in on musicians and artists because they have the attention. But everyone's suffering right now from all these things, so it you make a good point. It's like they want to blame it all on the artist, but it's like, it's like your neighbor, and it's your sister-in-law and it's your uncle or whatever the situation is, this country and the world for that matter has gone through a very traumatic event with this whole pandemic. And so, it's only accentuated stuff and made it kind of wild. How was your experience with the pandemic? What were you doing over there? How'd you use your time?
That's when I made a lot of the music I did. I wrote a novel, which I'm just about through with.
Oh, wow.
So I made, and I taught a lot as well. So I made good use of the time. I was bound and determined to do that because I could see it was going to really be, nobody could play, live. So that's only now just starting to come back, and the ticket prices are unbelievable.
Oh my God, right?
Whoa.
Yeah, people were.
Girls that went to see Billie Eilish, it cost them $250 a piece to see the show.
Wow, and that was probably just general admission tickets.
I think they had decent seats, but it was really expensive. And to go see a legacy act like the Eagles, oh my gosh, you're talking about $500. Paul McCartney is another one. I even had a lot of young people going to see him, and the prices were unbelievable. They were very good concerts, excellent concerts. They better be, right?
Well, they got to recoup those losses, man. They got to recoup 3 years.
Yeah. I think people are starting to get back into it now. They had that big festival in Europe, that Glastonbury,
mm-hmm. Yeah,
where Bill and Kendrick Lamar were headlining. I think Paul McCartney was one of the headliners too.
Yeah.
So everybody's getting back out there again. So that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us about your book. Can you talk about your book? I'm really interested.
Actually, yeah, it's actually about my life. I would call it autobiographical fiction. So I've used my life and particularly the music aspects of it to tell the story of the time I lived.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of references to things that actually happened. There are a lot of things that actually happened to me, but they may be put into a different context. The characters are, some of them are an amalgam of certain people. And you understand what I'm saying? So it does work in a chronological order and that sort of thing. But and I tried to use a writing style that was similar to what I use in my lyrics as well. So. But it's been fun, and it's also, if any of you out there planning on writing your first novel, it's a lot of work.
What kind of things? What kind of work do you have to put into it? Like, I imagine having to remember all these things and categorize it and stuff. But like, what did you find?
That's actually the easy part. Is actually figuring out a way to write it. You have to have a style. I mean, there's punctuation and all that, but no, it's the way you have to put your words together. Really, you have to develop a style. At least I do, and that's the hard part. So as you're writing through, and you have to keep that style consistent. Yeah. Right? You can't be stuck going all over the place unless that's the point you're trying to make. But and that's real hard to do, to maintain that over. I'm up to about 250, 275 pages now, and it's just it's a slog. I'm telling you, it really is.
What do you have like? Are you like one of those writers that from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. I'm gonna drink my coffee and eat my breakfast, and then I write for 3 hours, and then that's it? Or how do you go about that kind of workload?
I don't have set schedules even for music or anything.
Oh, really?
It just comes up. I do try to put a lot of time into it because I like doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You got to have that. You got to like doing it. And for songwriters, if they're listening, some people can write songs real quickly. They come quickly, and a lot of times people think those are their best songs. And that may be the case. I don't know. I tend to, particularly the lyrics, I tend to work on those a while. The melodies come pretty quickly. But now everything's changed as far as the recording of stuff, right? I mean, all of us, people listening, yourself, we can do the whole thing on a laptop.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. So if it helps, I'll describe how I record my stuff.
Please.
So what I do is I have a digital recorder. It's not even a laptop, but it's something that I've learned to use very quickly. And it is digital. So it is on a hard drive. Okay. And so what I do there is, like, for example, if you listen to any of that music at the beginning there, what I do is I put the vocals, the guitars, and the bass. I record all of that myself. And then I do a mix. And then I take it to another person who is really good with Logic, which is the Apple DAW, which is the recording program on Apple. And there's Pro Tools and Ableton and Cakewalk. There's a whole bunch of them. But Logic and Pro Tools are probably the most famous. And so then what we do is we add the drums, which may be loops. They may be a drum machine that we put together. We add samples, soundscapes. We destroy them. We do different things so they don't sound at all like what we started with. You understand what I'm saying? You can do literally anything. Of course, on that Putin thing, for example, there's marching soldiers on there. There's all sorts of stuff. There's strings. There's any little keyboard things we need. We can put those in. And then that's added to what I do. And then you have to mix that and then master it. And then that's the end of it. And I'm sure that's similar for a lot of people. And if you're in the hip hop world, definitely. Yeah. Because a lot of your beats, including the bass, are all done off a keyboard. Not always, but a lot of the time. Yeah. And, you have that, hip hop tends to have a real heavy bass. They tend to have that 808 drum machine sound with the cymbal thing on there all the time. But it's so that becomes real, and people who produce dance stuff, electronic music. There was a guy who was producing Lady Gaga, and he was talking about doing his work on a laptop on the plane from LA to New York.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. No,
So how it's changed a lot. And unless you get in with that and can make peace with it, you're not going to get very far these days unless you have the wherewithal to own your own recording studio.
Right. Right.
And if you want to deal with, tape and all that kind of thing, you can still do that. I think actually Dave Grohl with the Foo Fighters still does that.
Yeah, he bought that studio. What is it?
Yeah, he did. He bought the equipment.
Oh, he bought the equipment.
He bought the board. Yeah, it's an old Neve board that. You probably could still use that board, definitely.
Oh yeah,
probably do. They just feed it into a computer instead of into a tape machine, obviously.
Right.
But it's good to get that, in hand, that whole technological aspect of recording your stuff. And so it means that songwriters can really make some excellent demos on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it has changed so much. And like when you're talking about tape, I mean, now it's funny how tape, now when you go to record on the tape, that is considered a specialty thing now, right? It's like my wife recorded her first EP a couple years ago. She out of San Diego. She recorded it with it was a live setup, it was and it was all onto tape, and then they dumped it into Pro Tools, and she was going for a specific sound, right? They had all the old preamps and old compressors and all that stuff. It's like it's a very boutique thing now to go and get. It's a very unique sound that people are chasing, but back in the day, that's all you could do, right? And there was this. I don't know how you feel about it. I'm actually curious, but I feel like there had to be a certain level of musicianship when it came to recording on tape, because especially if you're in a big studio, tape isn't cheap. You have to keep things moving. Or even if you're self-funding in a studio, which is even more wild, and recording on the tape, you're paying for everything. Every minute counts. So, what do you think about the level of musicianship as things have gone digital? Because now you can make mistakes, and you can just fix that. You can just loop something, or you can take another piece of the song and just throw it in there quickly. Or do you think that it's lowered the standard of musicianship? And if so, do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? Or I'm just curious on how you feel about that.
Well, I'll say this. I'll say it this way. There used to be a jazz club here in LA called the Blue Whale. And it was a really excellent club and showcased a lot of the newer jazz talent. Because I have always loved jazz, and so I would go down there quite a bit. And what I was always struck by is that here's all these musicians that were playing incredible stuff, amazing technique, unbelievable. I'm talking about people in their early 20s through like their 40s, the younger generation of musicians. And there's more than there's ever been. Yeah. And I think that's probably true of any genre you want to talk about, because so many people are playing music, right? If you go on YouTube and you're a guitar player, I mean, it's ridiculous what you can see on there. You see guys playing, 8,000 miles an hour and shredding like crazy, any style you want, and crazy stuff on there. Now, how many of them will become famous? That's a whole nother question, because you still need the ultimate software, which is the song. For me, the only thing that is probably lacking nowadays in the importance of it as it went into the recording is the songwriting itself. A lot of songwriting now is done by committee.
Oh, yeah.
So you have like 4 and 5 people on one song, for example. Now, there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but you have situations where you'll have people come up with a small part on digitally keyboard thing. Maybe it's a beat or something like that. Then somebody will say, okay, we'll work with that a little bit. And so the person, okay, works with it, and say, okay, that's cool. Now they take that, they give it to somebody else who starts to develop a melody over that, and on and on and on, until you finally have the whole thing. And so I think that has suffered, the song craft, probably. Now, someone like Taylor Swift, for example, she writes songs. You know, those are definitely songs, whether you like her or not. I think actually she is a great role model for women.
Yeah.
Because she calls the shots. It doesn't matter what aspect of her career it is, whether it's in the studio or anywhere else. And she's writing the tunes. Now, she may have help with some of them, but she is the engine behind all of it. And for example, when Apple was switching over and then they wanted to have this 3-month period where they were going to allow subscribers for free, but they also weren't going to pay the artists. And she says, no, you're not doing this.
Yeah.
She says, take my stuff off of there. You can't do that, you know? And so she stood up for the whole rest of the industry, for all the other musicians out there.
Yeah.
And she's done that several times.
Yeah.
Which also another thing for your listeners there, Spotify. If you can get your stuff on a playlist, that's really the way to get more streams. And you can do that at the very beginning. But if you're going to release something, you have to do it and let them know beforehand so that they can look at it and see if they'll get you on it. But if you've already released it, it's no good. But after you released it, you can still do it if you can find someone like I did who can actually get you a playlist and not one that's going to attract bots, because that's another little trick they pull. You see these guys on Facebook advertising that sort of thing. You got to be very careful because a lot of times it's not real people on there. Okay. Yeah. But I had these people, really nice folks, and they got me on playlists. Like, for example, the Billie Eilish thing. Let's take that as an example. Now, I'm not 300 million and all that sort of thing because I've been in TikTok. But it jumped it up 60,000 streams I got right in the first month when I had 0.
Yeah.
So the playlists do make a big difference on something like Spotify. Yeah. But getting back to what we originally talked about, if you can get a little familiar with at least how recording works on a computer, even if it's GarageBand is a very sophisticated program, and it's very accessible. You can learn how to do just about anybody can, or sit with somebody who does know and at least get an idea so that you can communicate with them as to what you want.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
It's real important. It used to be important to me in recording studios back when it was still tape. I wanted to make sure that I could communicate with an engineer about what I wanted and to tell him in a sort of a general technical way what I was looking for. And that way you're more liable to get what you want, and you can communicate with the guy on the same level. It's real important to have that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
Yeah, and to your original question, that I think there's unbelievable musicians out there. As to whether they're being used in the same way, you might have something there. I don't know that for sure.
Yeah.
See, when I recorded, like in the late 70s, when it was the heyday of the studio musician, you'd have these incredible guys would come in, and you could give them the song. Didn't matter what the genre was. Didn't matter in the least. I was sitting one time with Lee Ritenour, who maybe folks probably wouldn't know, but he was a smooth jazz great, and he made a lot of money, but he was also a studio musician. And we were playing a flat out rock tune. And so I said, Lee, here's the tune, and he's playing. And I said, at the end of it, I just want you to go out with a solo. Now, the only time I'd heard Lee was playing jazz and funk, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
He ripped a rock and roll solo at the end of that song. It was just jaw dropping.
Nice. And
this is the kind of stuff these guys would do, just on command. And you could put anything in front of them. And as far as the music, they could read it.
Yeah.
Didn't matter.
Right.
Yeah. Now, a lot of these guys are on the road with people.
Yeah.
That's what studio musicians do now, is they go on the road because that's where the money is again.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree with you in the fact that, like, there is a lot more musicians out there. I feel like more than ever now, and I feel like a lot has to do with, like, social media or YouTube. They call it YouTube University, right? But it's but yeah, no, there is something about when you hear about these older musicians and that were coming from, when the music industry was very powerful and recording was a very powerful tool, and everybody has access to recording equipment now, but at a time there was gatekeepers, and the people who were like in these temples, who could really play, could really really play. So it is strange how technology has allowed some musicians to sort of be lazy, I guess. I guess that's a bad word for it, but to not be so proficient in their instrument, but still get a good quality recording or get something out that sounds really good. And I mean, I personally, I used to think that was kind of, bullshit. I was like, that sucks, because, people are out there learning their instrument, right, learning their craft. But as I gotten older, I'm just like, whatever gets the song out, whatever gets the music out, whatever gets this thing going, I feel like is positive, right? It's not a bad thing, I guess, is what I'm saying. But there,
No,
but
it's.
go ahead.
I think. Well, if we could take two examples now. Billy and her brother.
Yeah.
Record all those tunes, on her first album, or maybe even most of the second one, was recorded in their bedroom there. Mm-hmm. And Phineas is very adept at the whole digital recording process, and he uses Logic. Right. And on some of those tracks for Billy, and maybe some of you guys have listened to them talk about their recording process on YouTube. There's some great stuff, actually, if you should look for that. But he talks about some of those tracks. There's 100 overdubs of her singing a particular thing. Wow. So that thickens the sound of her voice. So it just sounds huge, Yeah. And when she does that, like, for example, on Bad Guy, that hit she had off of her first album, on some of those tracks where she's doing the layered harmony, she had to sing exactly, and I mean exactly, the way she sang the first one. So in other words, the breaths, where she held out the word, it had to exactly fit. Wow. So you get this, amazing sound, and he's proficient. He can play the stuff he needs to play. Mm. He can play guitar. He plays it when they play live. He plays guitar, he plays keyboards. I mean, she only has two people behind her on stage. Yeah. Great, Right. And there's another indie band that's called Cigarettes After Sex. Hmm. And when I first heard this group, I thought for sure the lead singer was a female. Well, there's only guys in the group. And moody, dark kind of stuff. And the only criticism I would have is that every song pretty much sounds the same. Even some folks I know who really like the band will admit that. Yeah. But here's the thing. Now, this is a band that has 400 million streams, that sort of thing. They're from El Paso. Hmm. So you see what the digital universe can do if somebody picks you up on TikTok or something. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, there you are. Now they've done a Tiny Desk concert on NPR and all that sort of stuff. So, and they have millions, hundreds of millions of streams on the streaming services. So that's kind of the landscape we have nowadays. Right. You don't need to necessarily be in Nashville or New York City or Los Angeles anymore to sort of get discovered or even to work. I mean, I know some. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing, Absolutely. People still end up out here in New York, though, and London and all that. Yeah. They still want to come out here because there's so many other people doing what they do and understand what they do. And so you have this camaraderie, right? And everybody wants to be in a community and be around other musicians and songwriters and all that. You get inspiration from all of that. Mm. So that's another reason why. Yeah. Plus the weather's great out here. It's beautiful. I lived in San Diego for 13 years. I did not want to leave. I love San Diego. I love, in LA, I had a love-hate relationship with LA, but towards the end, I loved LA, just because it became something really cool over the years.
Because when I first got there in about mid 2000s, working in San Diego, then and working sometimes up in LA, it was just like it felt very despondent. It didn't feel like it was a cohesive thing, at least in San Diego. Towards leading up to the pandemic, it felt like there was a community, and you could kind of feel that in Los Angeles, where there was like a real community kind of coming out and supporting each other. I know LA is much more vast community than San Diego, but a lot of the people travel back and forth and work the same scenes. So like I got to know some people and got to play some cool places up there. But yeah, man, I thought LA before I left and I'm not sure what it is now. I haven't been out there in a while, but the last time I was in Los Angeles, there was just homeless encampments under every fucking every overpass.
Well, because of the weather, if I'm homeless, I'm not going to live in some place where it gets cold. Right?
You just stay out of Minneapolis if you're homeless, friends.
Can I ask you something? Since you came up in the 2000s, since we're talking about songs and stuff, and the difference in the top 40, you came up in the time when rock was still happening. And of course, in the 90s is when the grunge thing happened with Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and all that. And then you had Incubus and a lot of bands there still going on, even Green Day and all that was still raging in the 2000s. And then it started to tail off as Napster and everything else started coming in.
Yeah. Well, I think it was like, like you're saying, I think Napster stuff came off, but then there was sort of this emergence of that indie garage rock, with like the White Stripes, the Black Keys started coming up in that time in the 2000s. So you had this reemergence of like underground indie rock that ended up eventually becoming mainstream, like a lot of things do. Scenes sort of explode. So as the MTV generation, it sort of started fading out because like you were saying in the late 2000 or early 2000s, late 90s even, you still had some sort of rock, but it was still very much centered around MTV. And then as soon as the music was available for everybody and everybody was sharing the music, and then YouTube kind of came on and blew the doors off of things as well. You had this emergence of underground artists who were sort of doing it on their own and really hitting the road hard and really creating this new sound out of sort of that old feel, like especially like man, what's the name of that New York band who did oh my gosh, I wish I could remember, but they had a couple hits, and I mean Julian, his name is Julian Casablanca, is the lead singer of the band.
Oh, the Strokes.
Thank you. Yes, the Strokes was like one of those bands that sort of helped usher in. I feel like helped usher in that indie sound that sort of came up. So when I was coming up in the 2000s, that's where I gravitated, because at one point I did feel like rock sort of died out really poorly, like even Marilyn Manson was like, rock is dead, and he was like, a rock star. And but there's always a reemergence, right? There's always a new scene sort of coming up and making a splash, if you will.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
Well, yeah. I mean, even now, but I mean, now I feel like there's so much of everything now, and like how we were kind of talking about recording equipment. Spotify, the gatekeepers have sort of come down, and now the gatekeepers are like the playlist curators, right? The people you sort of have to pay to get on these playlists. But with TikTok, and even TikTok is curated now. You can hire companies to get your songs to go viral. You can pay them to put your songs and work with creators, content creators, to get your music on their platform. And maybe you'll get a viral hit. I know indie artists now who are like they're working with like a label, and their label requires them to post all this stuff on social media. And now they're like, well, we need to get a viral video before we can release your album. And I'm like, oh my God, that's horrifying. I couldn't imagine my album being held hostage until I got some sort of viral video that is basically manufactured at this point. So yeah, there's a lot up against people coming up, but I feel like there's so many avenues for people to choose and listen to from now. Indie artists and electronic and hip hop. I mean, there's all these underground scenes that are bubbling up because the internet will always prevail. No matter what the gatekeepers are doing, there's always an underground scene that is going to be available for everybody because the internet is it's omnipresent, right? It's everywhere. Everyone always has access to it for the most part, and there's always going to be room and space for another sound, another band, another scene to sort of come up, whether or not they're on TikTok, whether or not they're on Spotify playlist or not. There's always room for more. So there's a lot of great rock bands and stuff coming up now that are just, they're making their way through. They're doing the work. They're climbing the ladder, I suppose. But yeah,
Well, they don't have the opportunity to compete for a hit record on the top 40 like they used to.
Right.
And you don't. And I think one of the reasons that classic rock, for example, that people still listen to all that stuff is because of the quality of the songs.
Yeah.
And so I heard Sheryl Crow talking about this the other day, that that traditional kind of songwriting is pretty hard to ignore, even over a long period of time. I mean, that Beatle thing that came out that Peter Jackson did, that 8 hours of the Beatles, they're in their last recording sessions and stuff. I mean, that was watched by hundreds of millions of people, because there's still a magic there. And of course, the song, for example, I used to have vocal students, and a lot of them were very young. And these are some that weren't brainwashed by their parents with Beatle music, when they were younger. So they didn't know the Beatles all that well, but I would have them sing Beatles songs, and they would always say how much fun they were to sing. And of course, they realized it's because of the quality of the songwriting was why they were so easy to sing, So, but I think there's still going to be people writing great songs and want to do that. It's just the outlet for it is going to be kind of murky because it's so spread out and so vast nowadays.
And I think, it's so saturated in that. And I feel like I'm not trying to tell people to lower their standards of success, but like there is a different ideal of success now. You have a lot of these artists. I see it all the time on like these Facebook ads where they're just like, hey, you can make money off your music. There's always an audience for you. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be, on the cover Rolling Stone, whatever that means anymore, because Rolling Stone, all these outlets have sort of starting to become sort of irrelevant because, social media, TikTok, and it's so easily accessible. The internet, sort of watered down a lot of stuff and kind of leveled the playing field. But I feel like people can find success in the music, find their audience, but I don't know if, being Justin Bieber or Olivia Rodriguez is the absolute end all be all for people now. Like that is a goal I'm sure for everybody who gets into this, is they want some sort of success and reaching their music, reaching a massive audience. But what's happening now is this movement where it's like, well, you can just make a living and make a life with what you create. And I feel like that is, a sort of this other attainable goal that's been allowed through the internet and stuff. So yeah, having widespread success throughout all these, MTV or whatever, these, being on these huge festivals and having the success of Justin Bieber, it's still something that people want, but I feel like people are starting to gravitate to the idea of just living off their art. And I know that's sort of what I do. And Twitch is a great example of that. You find all these people on this platform who are musicians who are making a living off of just streaming from their bedrooms. I'm in my bedroom right now with a green screen behind me, and I'm not making a living off this at this level. But there are musicians and there are people on this platform who are making a living off of just streaming music, streaming their own original music. Like my wife today she just played a whole set of original music, had like 30 people in there hanging out and just, like you can sort of make this new way where you can find a living through it, and it's not going to be massive success. And I don't even think she wants like that kind of attention anymore. But to be able to live off of what you create is, I think, has become sort of a new widespread goal. Of course, there's always going to be people who want to be the next Justin Bieber, but it's possible just to make a living and live your life and be an artist. And that's good enough for some.
I agree with that totally. I mean, people, they need to get out and play. That's for sure. I mean, in the case of like your wife, if you're a solo artist, a lot of people are doing those home concerts where they, there's even a website where that'll kind of book you for that kind of stuff. Go to people's houses and they charge admission to play. I'm sure you're aware of that.
Oh yeah.
But there's also kind of the people I'm talking about were more interested not in being Justin Bieber, but in achieving something meaningful and spectacular almost with the music.
Yeah.
And you had famous musicians, which you don't really have now. You don't really have that.
Right.
You don't have famous musicians. You don't have the average music lover who knows who's playing on some of these sessions, and people like Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton and all those guitar gods from the previous decades. You don't really have that kind of stuff anymore. That is missing.
Yeah, I could see that, and it's probably because there's a widespread of talent out there now that
well, it's also the video element of it, where it's very much a visual medium, and so when you're talking about being a performer, you've got to really you have to really have a whole show in front of you there. I mean, even someone like Taylor Swift, she writes folky kind of pop country songs, but she goes out there with a tour that needs like 12 semis to carry all this stuff, you know, and you really have to have an enormous show to go on. Although Ed Sheeran, who has the most streamed song of anybody, for a while there, he was going out on the road with him and a guitar. Now imagine, he could fill Madison Square Garden and it's just him.
The overhead is beautiful.
All the money. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, what a gig.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I've seen him a couple of times with a band, but I mean, he doesn't need anything. He just walks up there and plays, you know?
Yeah, man.
And he's got this little tiny guitar. Right?
Yes.
It's just amazing.
Absolutely.
You know, that, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Billie Eilish, the same thing, you know? And Olivia, she carries this band of women.
Yeah.
And they're a hard rock band. They're really good.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely.
So people are doing it the old way. And I think some of those people like Olivia Rodrigo, she's a songwriter. I think she sees herself as a songwriter. She wants to be known for that.
Yeah.
So she's kind of old school in that way, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I don't begrudge anybody anything that they're trying to achieve. It's like people will say, for example, someone like, let's say Britney Spears. They'll say, how can she? And she's not talented, blah blah blah. You know, well, she is talented in certain areas, and she did enough to bang on doors and to put herself out there over and over and over again, put herself on the line. She deserves it, and so that's why I'm for anybody who can make it in the music business or the artistic. If you found a way to do it, then you deserve it. You know, you've done the job, and that's the thing for most people. And for your audience, there is you got to show up. That's the first thing you got to do.
Absolutely.
You got to write. You got to sing. You got to play. You got to get yourself out there. You know, whether it's online or it's in person, that's the most important thing. You got to show up.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's like half the battle almost. I mean, having talent really helps, but I mean, a lot of times you see people sort of falling into roles that it's because they just kept coming back and then they were there and they're consistent and they were available and they were, you know, they could step into that role. And it, you know, there's a lot to be said about that. I think Woody Allen had some kind of quote about that, but you know, Woody Allen, that guy.
There's a whole nother story there.
Yeah, right. He's actually a really talented musician too, which is really
No, but
interesting.
yeah, he plays clarinet. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, his band is really cool. I dig his band, but um, I had some questions from the chat that I'm forgetting to ask here. Are you left-handed?
no.
Okay, and then
And
what?
by the way, if
Hmm.
you're trying to play guitar and you're left-handed and you haven't started yet, play right-handed
Hmm. What? Why?
because you won't have trouble. And all the diagrams and everything else are
Hmm.
written for right-handed people. If you want to go buy a nice guitar, there's way more right-handed guitars than there are left-handed guitars. In
Yeah.
fact, you maybe see one or two left-handed guitars. It's just if you haven't started yet, don't switch to right-handed and play that way.
Yeah, I would agree with that because either way, when you're starting guitar, it just feels like a foreign object in your hand. So like whether or not you're righty or a lefty, it's gonna just be awkward anyways at first. So it's like you might as well just go with it. Just go with that awkward lean in and get at it. I would definitely agree with that. That's yeah, for sure. We had another question here is do you listen to vinyl? Do you still listen to vinyl? And then if so, what's your favorite vinyl to listen to?
I don't listen to vinyl, and it's not because I don't like it. I just, to be honest with you, the only time I listen to music is in my car.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I still have a CD player in my car, but I don't listen to vinyl because it requires a lot of equipment. I have a buddy, for example, that's he has one of those $18,000 turntables.
The Max or
and
whatever.
he buys that vinyl that's real thick. It's supposedly, yeah, you know what I'm saying.
180
And
grams.
I go over there and I really enjoy listening to the vinyl stuff. And believe me, I do miss sitting with musician friends and stuff, and we get like a new album of somebody we really wanted to hear, and you're sitting there after a gig at 2:00 in the morning and putting the album on the record player and listening. I still have incredibly fond memories of that and wish I could do it again, and wish you could sit there with the album cover and see who played on it and who wrote this and that and everything else they put on there. I miss all of that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's great. Yeah, I'm a fan of vinyl. My dad was huge into vinyl, and so I just sort of picked that up and just kept. So I don't have $18,000 equipment, but I did invest some money into some nice equipment to listen to it because for that exact reason is that it's just tactile. You can hold it, you can look at it. Whereas if you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, it's just some digital signal and then this little picture that comes with the signal. And it's like, I absolutely love Spotify. Not that I'm sitting here gonna crap on Spotify because I think Spotify and all these different streaming services are amazing. Because I love the fact that I can just go and listen to anything on demand. But then I also like the fact that when I'm going to listen to music and really intently listen to music, that I can put something on, that I can look at the album cover, look at the artwork, and really appreciate the sound. And I love the sound of of vinyl and stuff too. And so there's a whole ritual to it, and it feels good and reminds me of my younger days of jamming out with my dad or even in my early 20s because I always sort of had a record player on hand. So it's just one of those things, man. I just really dig it, the nostalgia of it all. But yeah, no, I feel you on the whole thing. There's a lot that goes into it as well. So I feel you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a financial commitment, and it's space in your place and all that kind of stuff. It's just something I haven't done, but I certainly respect it and admire it, and I think it's wonderful that vinyl's coming back. It's one fossil fuel that I guess we can because it takes oil to make vinyl, right?
Right. That's true. I never thought about that, but yeah, you're absolutely right.
It does.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was an artist at Motown, it was in the late 70s, and this was after the 70s where the rock and roll excess was at its absolute peak. And albums were selling like 10 million records and everything else. It was a wonderful time. But right after that was the Iranian oil crisis, where we had the first kind of stoppage of oil supplies. and you had lines at gas stations
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. And I lost a deal there because of it, because they were cutting back and they weren't signing any new artists. I mean, I'd been there for a while, but they were also signing me to a solo deal, and I lost it because of all that.
Wow.
They were cutting. Yeah, it was really something. So,
Wow. Just because they had to cut corners, and so like you
oh
just
yeah. Everything was real. Well, it was kind of like almost like when we went into the pandemic, where you felt this shroud over everything.
yeah.
And it took a while for it to come back. In fact, that would have been late 70s. So it didn't really, and that was also the disco era for your audience there, which when you're playing live music, unless you played in a band that played exactly the way the record was, and you played only disco music, you had a hard time working. And it wasn't until the whole new wave punk thing started that original music and stuff came back to the clubs. You could go down to the Whiskey, for example, and see bands again. And it was really great that it all came back like that. And that's where the Police happened, and Elvis Costello and the Runaways and the Go-Go's and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But for a while there, it was rough. Yeah, it was tough.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Can you sort of talk about your time at Motown and then sort of leading up to what you just told us?
Yeah, actually, my first go around with Motown was in the middle '60s when I was 19, I guess. I had a band together, and we. There was a manager in Cincinnati, Ohio, and he just happened to know a producer from Motown, or he thought he was a producer. Actually, his claim to fame was really being the wife of Mary Wells, who was a Motown artist who had lots of hits. Mm. And anyway, so he took us up to this white band. We looked like the Beach Boys. And he took us up to Detroit to record in the studio there. And he managed to hire the Funk Brothers, which was the Motown band that recorded all those hits.
Yeah.
But he had them over at this other studio, and he paid them under the table. Now, see, they were contract players, so if Barry Gordy would have found out, he probably would have shot them all. But so it was a full band with horns. I remember there was 3 black women that came in to augment the background parts we were doing, and one of the women had a baby in her arm breastfeeding, and she was reading the chart at the same time. I mean, wow. It was unbelievable. It was an amazing experience. And it was the kind of place where we had to be taken to a lunch counter to eat lunch, because this was where the Detroit riots happened 2 years later. It was the minority section of town, shall we put it?
Yeah.
And it was pretty rough there. But it was an education like no other. It was amazing to be with those men, and they were great to us. We were just these white kids, and they were the kind of guys that would play all day in the studios, and then they would play their music in what they called Blind Pigs, which were these nightclubs that would stay open until 5 a.m, and then they'd play jazz and stuff until the sun came up. And It was back another day doing the same thing again. They wear the sharkskin suits and everything else. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then when I finally came out to California, I met this couple of people who were songwriters. And they had gotten a songwriting deal at Motown, and they got me in there. And the president of Motown at the time was Suzanne DePass, who was still a bigwig, and she was very kind to me. And she signed me to an artist and a songwriting thing there. And right then, a buddy of mine got a song that was recorded by Diana Ross, so that was a huge deal, of course. And it became the title track to the album. And so it was, we got another song recorded by Rare Earth. It was a group that had 3 or 4 hits there. It was a white group, actually. And so I was in the studios there all the time. I was singing on other stuff, and playing guitar and all that. And that's also when I started working on the road with Paul Williams, who is still writing songs. Wow. Paul is the one who won an Oscar for Evergreen with Barbra Streisand, and has gotten Grammys. And in fact, a few years ago, I'm sure your listeners will know who Daft Punk is, the French dance group.
Absolutely.
Somehow or another, Paul, I don't know how he did it, but he wrote the lyrics and maybe some of the melody to 1 or 2 of the songs on that last album they did, which was so successful.
Yeah.
And remember seeing him accept the Grammy Award that Daft Punk got. And the guys were up there with those helmets on and everything else. And there was little Paul. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He just, he had his with the Carpenters back then. I mean, he had a ton of stuff, and he was an actor and everything else. So that all happened at the same time. But Motown moved, you see, from the famous Hitsville, USA house on Grand Boulevard in Detroit.
Yeah.
And then Barry decided to move everything out to Hollywood, but he didn't take the musicians with him.
Wow.
He started people out here,
Mm-hmm.
So when I was there in Hollywood, this was when Brick House, Lionel Richie was when What's Going On with Marvin Gaye,
Yeah.
and I met all those people. And Smokey Robinson, for one, was one of the nicest people you'll ever want to meet.
Oh, he looks
and for
nice.
you songwriters, there's a songwriter.
Yeah.
He wrote a ton of, it's not only for the Miracles, but for everybody else. He wrote My Girl, Temptations, all that stuff.
Yeah,
Wonderful guy. Really, really great.
He looks nice. He has those nice eyes, those kind eyes. Everybody loves his eyes.
No, and he still uses. He calls everybody man. He's just hip. He's just a great dude.
I love
really
it.
Nice person. Very. Yeah,
I was
really something. It was interesting to see the whole dynamic there. Motown, it's obviously a legendary place.
Absolutely.
But more for what they did in Detroit than for. Yeah, although. When Stevie Wonder did all that 4 albums in a row there were just, I think he won the Grammy for Best Album like 3 times in a row for, that all happened when it was out here in California.
Yeah.
So when he finally made his move of independence, he said, look, I'm going to do what I want and you have to do that or I'm not signing here anymore. And that's how he managed to do it.
Yeah.
He stood up, but of course he's Stevie Wonder.
So, yeah, Stevie Wonder can do that.
You're not going to do You're nobody.
So I was just curious then. So you wrote the songs with Peter, that like Evergreen?
No, I didn't write with Paul Williams.
I'm sorry, Paul.
Vocal arranging, and I played guitar some for his touring band.
I got you.
I worked with him on the Muppets movie, which was a big success for him. He wrote a lot of that stuff in that movie. So. No, I just wrote with a buddy of mine the Diana Ross tune.
Yeah.
I've really been a solo writer. I don't really enjoy collaborating all that much.
Why not?
Because I like writing melody and lyrics, both. I guess would be one answer. I just feel more comfortable. I work better by myself. It's just, it's not, I don't think it's a bad thing to collaborate with people, and I've done it. It's just, for me, just personally, it's worked out better to be a solo person as far as the songwriting is concerned. Now, when I get with a band, and I would say this to songwriters or recording artists in general, if you've got musicians that are good players and you like working with them, then the way you make it so that they feel the same way is to involve them in the process. In other words, if you've got arrangements, fine, but see what each musician adds to it, for example. And so then you're involving them in the creation of the music itself. And you're, of course, liable to get some great ideas from them, right?
Absolutely.
And so when you're putting your stuff together, see, then they start to feel like they're involved in it, like they have a stake in it, besides the fact that you're paying them to play or whatever arrangement you might have. So I think it's real important when you're playing with other musicians is to make them feel like they're involved in the arranging and the process and the music making that you're trying to do.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Like me and my wife has put together several different iterations of a band surrounding her music and our music, and that was one thing that we found success in is like, hey, like here's the music, here's the chords, and here's the feel, but like bring your parts to the table. Like that we want your opinion, we want your feedback. At the end of the day, we made the decisions that yes or no, but having people involved, and even if they had songs to write to, like involving that as well. It really did bring the band together. So like I've seen that in action, and that's probably one of the better ways to do it. But then, there's nothing wrong with just being like, listen, you're a hired band, you do what I tell you, and then we're going because I'm paying you to. So, which I've been
that would be the James Brown approach.
Yes. Oh man, James Brown, that guy, I love James Brown, but man, that guy
Well,
was
let me
about his
tell you something.
business. Please.
That is the greatest. That was the most exciting show I've ever seen. If you could see James Brown in the '60s live,
I bet.
was nothing like it, even to this day. And now, of course, you have all the computer lights and the huge sets and everything else. And he would come out with just his band and a microphone and a spotlight, and it was nuts. It
Yeah.
was absolutely nuts. And of course, he was the innovator of funk music.
Yes.
And there's no doubt about that. And just the way he performs, if you can see stuff on YouTube of him performing, if you haven't done that, folks that are listening to this, I would highly recommend it, because you can see where Michael Jackson got, the inspiration for what he did. Prince, the same thing.
Absolutely.
In fact, in all of us and what we listen to, people always ask me what I like. And I always say, well, I like a lot of different stuff, but very little of of everything. And I would say, for example, the two things that I can think of where I was listening in my car and had to literally drive off the side of the road to stop my car to listen to it was Papa's Got a Brand New Bag by James Brown and Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys, which still sounds like it's from outer space.
Absolutely.
No, it's all these years later. It's a monumental piece of work, but they sound a whole lot different, those two records,
Right.
But they influenced me, both of them, a great deal.
Yeah.
So you can find all sorts of things to give you inspiration. That's for certain.
Yeah.
And it's a good idea to listen wide and far. Right.
Yeah. Do you so writer's block is a thing for some musicians, writers too, and you're a writer, and you write music, you write lyrics and stuff. Have you ever dealt with writer's block before, and if so, how did you get past it?
I don't really have writer's block. There's just times to write because I want to record, I want to do stuff. But it doesn't mean that, for example, lyrics take me a lot longer than writing music, only because I want my lyrics to mean something. I'm not looking to write the same kind of love song over and over and over again, which of course works time and again for people, I just, it's just something I want my lyrics to be every bit as good as the music is. And so I spend a lot of time on it. So they do take a lot of time. And for lyric writers, by the way, a little tip, I would suggest getting a rhyming dictionary, and you can get one right online. There's one called Rhymer, for example, that's for free, because it can give you ideas for lines that you wouldn't have thought of if you hadn't seen that. I mean, you can think of certain things like if you have a fear rhyme, you got cheer, dear, here, you can think of those. But then you look at a rhyming dictionary and you see a whole raft of others.
Yeah.
You can really choice things that will give you ideas for another line that's much more pithy than what you were thinking about. And it really helps out a lot. So that's a little lyric tip there. But I mean, when it comes to writing the music, I don't care who it is, it's still a matter of sitting with your instrument, whatever it is, and noodling, right? I mean, that's essentially what you're doing. You're sitting down again and fool around with this, fool around with that, and you start to sing a little bit. And it's that same process, the same one. And then I remember a great line from Elton John. Somebody asked him what his favorite song of his was. And he said, the one I'm writing now. And I thought that was so on the money.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
as it should be. It should be like that, right? That's how it should be. Yeah, I mean,
I thought that was it was so right on the money. It was hilarious,
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
one I'm writing now,
Yeah.
And people may not think that's your best song, but nevertheless, that's the process that you enjoy. If you don't like the process, then why do it?
Yeah, it's not for you.
It's just going to be a chore, right? It's you have to write a song again, And if it's a chore, then they're too hard to. A good song is too hard to write.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you ever? I mean, when you look at prolific hit makers like the Beatles or something, and there's that classic interview where they're talking about, or where John Lennon's talking to Paul McCartney, they're like, let's write a swimming pool or something, it's something around that. It's like, I'm wondering if that ever was a chore for them to just be, because like when you hear them talk about what inspired their songs, it does sort of break down into very simplistic ideas. And they're just like, well, I was just passing a laundromat and I just saw somebody's name on there, like Eleanor Rigby or something. And they're like, so I was just like, I wonder what this woman's like. I'm wondering if there was ever a chore for them after a certain amount of time. Or I mean, I can imagine there was a chore because they had to deal with each other's, egos and their attitudes, but I'm just wondering if it ever would have been a chore for them to sit down and write hits.
I'm sure it was. I mean, of course, as they went along, they started writing more on their own.
Yeah.
And then, obviously a song like Eleanor Rigby is a Paul McCartney song, and a song like What Strawberry Fields would be more like a John Lennon song, or Norwegian Wood, or something like that. Mm-hmm. Now, the other one may have contributed things to that, but I think early on they probably were writing pretty much together and really turning them out. Yeah. I mean, it is hard to write a great song, I'm sure. I mean, Paul seems to write constantly. Yeah. And then other people like that maybe don't write as constantly. That they wait for the time when they need to write an album, the way they used to do it. They'd wait till that time came. They'd done some touring. They'd take some time off with the family or a loved one or something like that, and then it's time to write the next record.
Yeah.
Right. And then, so that's when they start to do that. Other people, I think, are probably writing all the time in one form or another.
Yeah.
And if you can find the name on a store that gives you an idea for a song, go at it, or somebody says something, you hear a conversation, and it gives you an idea. I know people that keep books with the list of titles, just cool titles.
Yeah.
And for God's sake, if you're going to write a love song, go at it from a different way. Try to find an incident or something that illustrates an idea about whatever you're trying to say about love or a love affair or something. Because otherwise, there's plenty of hit records still right now that use the same lines that are regurgitated over and over and over again. There still are all the time.
Baby, baby, baby.
Yeah. You listen to lines in these songs and they're always the same.
Yeah.
And yet people relate to them and they sing them along. They're riding in the car. Yeah. So I can't say that it's the wrong tactic to use, but if you want to really write something good and that sounds like you, then you got to go that extra mile.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Marianne wrote in the chat, Danny Ray, the legendary MC and Cape Man for James Brown. The estate said in a statement, Ray worked with Brown from 1960 until the music legend's death on Christmas Day 2006. He became famous for draping a cape over Brown at the end of his signature tune, "Please, Please, Please." That's some great bit of trivia there.
That's absolutely true. She's absolutely right about that.
I love you, you love me, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Take away the word baby from Ashanti's career. She has no career. Listen, baby's a great name. Hey, it's great. It's your pet name. It can be everything. So whatever.
Well, if you listen, for example, one of my buddies, a good player, but he was moaning and groaning. A lot of my generation, they sound like their parents. He's going on and on about, Olivia Rodrigo and some of these young writers and stuff, and comparing those to the Beatles. And I said to him, look, when the Beatles' first hits came, what were they? We're talking about I Want to Hold Your Hand, She Loves You, Yeah, 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 Love Me Do, okay? And Olivia Rodrigo's first song was Driver's License, which was a pretty good slice of, she found a way to talk about heartbreak in a pretty unique little way there. And she was only 18 when she wrote that, and they were writing those songs when they were early 20s. So what are you telling me here?
Yeah, yeah, man. It's just however it gets out.
It's just, and watch for this, as you guys get older, you'll become your parents.
I just like, can you keep it down? Can you guys just stop? I just need silence. It's like, I live in an apartment building and people are like stomping around upstairs. I'm like, these sons of bitches over here. Like, I can't concentrate over here. Naders wants to know if you've ever met Chuck Berry.
No, I never met Chuck Berry. I saw him. The interesting thing about Chuck Berry, if you didn't know, the person who asked the question, is that he was one guy who he never carried a band. You always had to, whatever town he was in, the local musicians union had to put a band together for him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, there's a really good Chuck Berry documentary called "Hail Hail Rock and Roll" that Keith Richards had a hand in putting together.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and Bruce Springsteen talks about being in one of these bands to back Chuck Berry, and he said we always played all those songs like Johnny Be Good in the key of A because that's a good guitar key, right? Well, Chuck Berry played that song in B flat. So they were starting to play the song because you just had to know the song. Chuck just assumed you know my songs.
Yeah.
And so they're playing a half step off.
Right.
And they're playing the song, you know?
Yeah.
Because Chuck Berry actually grew up. He was a little older than the other rock people like Jerry Lee Lewis and Elvis, and even Little Richard. So he was a little older. So he came up in the big band era. And when you were talking about T-Bone Walker, the blues guys, so it was more of a jazz thing. And they played a lot of blues in horn keys, which would be B flat.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah.
So that's what he was playing when he played those songs.
Yeah.
But Chuck Berry, I mean, he sort of laid down the law about rock and roll guitar.
Absolutely.
I mean, what can you say about that? Rock and roll at that time was sort of a jump blues, we used to call it back then. And so that's how rock and roll evolved. It evolved from the blues, and then you had this insistent beat, right?
Yeah.
Rocking. And that's how rock and roll started. And then, of course, the way it was performed was also the other aspect of it,
Yeah.
It's really great stuff. I mean, if you heard Little Richard doing Lucille or something on the radio right now, or Elvis singing Hound Dog, you would go, whoa, what is that?
Yeah.
It's just like, wow, what is that? If you're not got your ears totally closed, you need to hear, electronic keyboard or something like that. But it's just amazing stuff, But no, I saw him live. And in fact, I saw him at the Fillmore during that Summer of Love in San Francisco.
Oh, rad.
And Steve Miller's band backed him. So that was a real treat. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, the Chuck Berry, man, like he definitely changed the game and brought it to the forefront, brought rock and roll to the forefront. I don't know what his problem is, but man, he definitely went off the rails towards the end there when he was getting caught with all those. I think.
Oh, that happened with him. He was indicted for the Mann Act for transporting a minor across state lines. That was back when he was big. That was in the 50s.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. So wow.
Yeah, he always. Well, and then Jerry Lee Lewis married his 13-year-old cousin.
Yeah.
Richard was a nut. I met that guy, and he was insane.
Little Richard?
Oh, yeah. I had a buddy live next door to me in Hollywood way back, and he was friends with Richard's brother. And so Danny wanted to get some pot one time, and so Richard was over there, and so he said, come with me. So they drive down to South Central Los Angeles, and he leaves Danny in the car in the neighborhood to go in somebody's house. He said he's never been so terrified in his life.
Yeah, I bet.
Unbelievable, So,
music. Yeah, I mean, I not to put the stigma of mental illness on musicians because it's that widespread, but there is something about a spirit of musicians, or at least the certain type of musicians that are just, I mean, it's wild. I'm not sure completely where that comes from. Maybe it's just unfettered access to everything once you hit a certain point in your life. And you think about like the 70s and Led Zeppelin and what they were doing and like, breaking, smashing up hotel rooms and stuff. There's something about rock and roll that the whole lifestyle that's just really, they just go out there. I don't know if it's just unfettered access to excess or, money, and I don't know, man. It's royalty almost.
Probably still true. I'm sure it's still true today to an extent. Yeah. I mean, somebody like, if you're talking about the performance aspect of it, when you talk about Little Richard, he was doing that not because of anything he was taking. It just, that was something that evolved out of his music and the way he wanted to perform. I mean, well, how can you explain it? How can you explain what Elvis did with combining country, with the blues, which is essentially what he did because he liked black gospel music, Jerry Lee Lewis banging on the piano. And it was a sort of a tradition, even if you want to go back to circus type stuff way back in the early part of the 20th century. You can go all the way through and see these people. They were just amazing performers, and it came out, and that's the way they performed. And so then that's evolved so that by the time you got to the late 60s and you had all those guitar bands and everybody, I mean, how do you explain Jimi Hendrix? He played for Little Richard. He played for Little Richard in his band. He did.
Yeah.
He played for Joey D and the Starlighters, who were a group that became famous because of the famous twist craze back then. And he played with them. So he was a nightclub musician. And so how do you explain his use of volume and feedback and all of that? And then, of course, the way he dressed and everything. I mean, he had so much charisma on a stage. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I explain that, but it was just the way he performed, and he didn't need drugs to do that. I think the drugs came later.
Yeah.
And it becomes part of the lifestyle, and it becomes part of the image, and people get lost in it.
Yeah.
And the worst time for musicians was the whole cocaine thing.
Yeah.
That was awful. It was really awful.
Was it the 80s, late 70s, the 80s?
Yeah, absolutely. I hated the 80s. The only band I liked during the 80s was the Police.
Ah, yeah. You didn't like any of the...
Very good band.
You didn't like any of the new wave stuff, or like,
Oh, no, I did. I absolutely did. And I went, even some of the bands that I still went to see it because it was just so nice to see original bands playing again.
Yeah.
It was just really great. I mean, I wasn't a fan of the Go-Go's, but I went and saw them and I enjoyed myself.
The Go-Go's are awesome.
They were having a great time, and doing their thing. I thought it was great. I really did. I had a marvelous time during all that. I wasn't crazy about punk music either, but I loved the energy of it. And there were even some bands. There was a band called, they were in Washington, D.C., and they did a song called Ape Drape, which was about the mullet haircuts, The song was hilarious. The Vandals. The Vandals. The Vandals.
Yeah.
And they had... There wasn't a lot of musicianship in punk bands, but that band had a really good guitar player. He could play.
Yeah.
And there was a black punk group I liked called Bad Brains.
Bad Brains is so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another one. And Fugazi, Washington State.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Really good band there. So,
yeah, man.
Yeah.
Was Fugazi? That's Rollins, right? Was that Rollins' band?
No. Rollins was Black Flag.
Black Flag. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. That was out. He was out here.
Okay. Yeah.
That was the LA punk scene.
Okay. Yeah. The 80s, was something when I was younger, I thought was just stupid. But like as I've gotten older, I absolutely love what happened in that. I mean, Prince came to prominence in the 80s, and he kind of developed. He took on a lot of those sounds, a lot of those instruments that defined those sounds in the 80s. I just absolutely love it. But it's interesting how every generation, it's like. It's hard to like wrap your head around it, right? Like you were saying, like how if you were to see Elvis Presley back in the day, sort of, moving his hips around and stuff, I can imagine as a parent seeing that and coming from, their generation being like, "What? Look at this guy. He just wants to bang all our daughters and stuff. Like this guy is the devil's too." But then when I hear, as I'm getting older, I'm hearing what like. Is it Cardi B or Nicki Minaj who they have this song called WAP, and it's just like WAP, bucket and a mop, where they're talking about how wet their vaginas are. And I'm just like, this is what kids are listening to. And then again, I've turned into my parents. So it's just interesting how every generation has to sort of ease into the music or just completely reject it.
In the case you're talking about there, I think there's a difference. I mean, Elvis's songs never, or any of those guys, their songs weren't like that. About the only thing they ever said was "Ball Tonight" or something. And half the kids didn't even know what that meant. I mean, it's much obviously much progressive society now. And they're exposed to so much stuff.
Yeah.
All of us, for that matter.
Absolutely.
So it just depends on what you want to have to say. I mean, I don't know. For me, I don't want to waste my time talking about stuff like that. I could, I mean, all of us could,
Right.
but it's just not a subject matter that just interests me very much, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I would never sit there and write lyrics about how drippy my
That's
penis
what I
is.
mean.
Yeah.
I just, I don't know.
No, so, you talk about the 80s and cocaine and stuff and you living through all this. Was there ever a period of time where you sort of maybe lost control and was hooked on substances, or have you ever, were you always sort of straight and narrow?
No, that there was about a 3 year period in the '80s where I went bankrupt and my career was over with, and yeah, it was horrible. And most of though for me, I was alone through all of that. Nobody really saw me go through that,
Hmm.
so I was lucky in that sense. But I had to pick myself back up from ground zero.
Wow.
And so it was, and I felt lucky because a lot of other people either died or it was much worse.
Yeah.
So, and it was, cocaine was something that was never enjoyable either. I mean, pot is fun.
Yeah.
I mean, psychedelics can be fun, they can also be scary, but they can be fun. But Coke was, and if you're around a bunch of people who are doing it, you're all boring and everybody wants to talk at once. And it's just, it's horrible stuff. It's just really awful.
It really is.
It's everything.
No.
But you talked about Prince during the '80s there. His best album, in my humble opinion, was made during that. It was called Sign of the Times.
Hmm.
It's a double album. And that to me was the zenith of his creativity in the recording studio. That was really something. I think that was an amazing record, really. And of course, he's always been a great performer. I actually saw him about a year before he died here, because he did a whole series of concerts in Los Angeles where he was sort of like a residency at the Forum.
Yeah.
So, he would play there 2 nights a weekend, and then he'd play 2 nights the next weekend and stuff like that. So I finally got a chance to see him play, and it was great. Band was, of course, a killer, and
Yeah.
it was wonderful.
He's amazing. I actually was on a podcast last night where they asked me, it was like, hey, I know Prince was a multi-instrumentalist and he had a lot of great talent and he was a great songwriter, but like, was he actually a good guitarist? And I know what my answer was, but I'm just curious what you think of what his skill level was as a guitarist.
Oh, he's a very fine guitar player.
Yeah.
But you don't want to just listen to his solos, because unfortunately that's kind of a lot of what you hear is just him doing a shred solo. But when you listen to anybody, for me anyway, is to listen to what they do all the rest of the time the song is going on.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's a lot of people that can shred a solo. There aren't as many people who can make a melody out of a solo, where it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that to me is a great soloist. It's somebody where you can follow a melody instead of stringing along a bunch of licks, which you can do on a guitar. Well, you can do it. So when you're listening to any musician for that matter, it's to listen to what they do besides the solo.
Yeah.
That to me tells you how good a musician the person is.
Yeah, and I like he was a tasty player too. Like Prince was a tasty guitarist.
Yeah.
He had great little, like, between his phrasing and little phrases on guitar between his phrasing of singing and stuff. So like he definitely had a great feel to him. And I agree with you. You can shred all day. You can learn all these licks that's been played over and over again. But at the end of the day, is it something that's moving you? Is it something that's moving the song? How is it affecting the song? And because you want it to be, you almost want it to be an extension of the voice or something. Like I always imagine it's like singing with your instrument, like you want it to be something where it leads to something. And then, like you're saying, a beginning, middle, and an end. I agree with that, because people can just play a bunch of notes over and over and over again, and that's fine, and there's room for that, and there's a market for that. But what are you saying? What are you actually saying with your instrument, and what are you emoting? Like, do you emote? Are you connected to your instrument in that sense? And that's when you really get great plays. Like, I know like Joe Satriani and there's a couple other of those like really badass guitar.
Yeah, you have Joe Satriani and Steve Vai
Yes,
and Eric
yes.
Johnson, are well-known ones. Joe Satriani actually has the largest selling instrumental rock album of all time, which was Surfing with the Alien.
Hmm.
And the one thing about Joe Satriani is that when you listen to his songs, you can hear a singer singing every single one of them.
Yeah.
They're beautiful melodic songs. They're wonderful. Steve Vai's more, as he will admit, he's more out there, but also a real talented guy. And all three of those guys are amazing guitar players. I mean,
Yes.
they're really good, and they can play melody as well as the rest of them. Now some of the most melodic soloing you'll hear is on Steely Dan records.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You'll hear some really amazing solos on those records because Donald and Walter, the guys who made up that group, they would have top session players play a solo on a song. And they might have two other guys play the same solo, and then they'd pick the one they liked the best.
Yeah. Hey, why not? No.
You know?
Why, if you have that, yeah, exactly. If you have the budget. No, Asia is probably one of my favorite albums of all time.
I think they're getting a lot of people have some kind of a burn the saddle about Steely Dan. I think possibly some of it has to do with Donald Fagen's voice, the fact that it's so well recorded and very but I think people are coming around to them because in fact, I heard the guy who played guitar in the Sex Pistols. He said, I used to hate Steely Dan, all during the time. He's a punk god, He said, now he says, I listen to them all the time.
Yeah.
But I would suggest to you folks that one example I would give you is a song called Don't Take Me Alive. It's on the Steely Dan album called The Royal Scam, which was just before Asia. And it's right at the very beginning of the song. And there you'll hear a classic example of what I'm talking about a melodic solo that is just, oh my God. When I first came to town, that thing was out. Everybody in this town was playing that solo, trying to figure it out and looking at it and seeing what he was doing, But it's tremendous stuff.
Yeah.
Really good stuff.
The Naders and Marianne are talking about Eddie Van Halen, and then Naders was talking about Buckethead. Are you familiar with Buckethead?
Absolutely. And I would say about Eddie, I mean, everybody, likes Eruption and the soloing he did and the tapping. He was certainly one of the first ones, if not the first. But, listen to what for example, a song like Panama, listen to what he plays on guitar while the singer is singing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where I love to listen to Eddie Van Halen.
Yeah.
Buckethead's I don't know. When I've heard his stuff, he's played with various people. It's usually on stuff that's pretty way out.
Right. Yeah.
So I really haven't had a chance to really hear him play a song-based kind of thing, really. Yeah. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I do.
So, I would hesitate to say what I would think there. It's more, he did stuff with Bernie Worrell, that jazz fusion guy, but it's all pretty, it's way out kind of stuff. So. But Eddie, Eddie is a very melodic player. Great stuff to the themes of the songs he played. I thought were really good. Very good player.
Oh, the Dew. Wait a second. The Dew is Buckethead's child. I don't know who the Dew. I've never heard of the Dew.
Well, I have no idea. All I know is he had the chicken bucket on.
Yeah. Now Naders wants KFC. So, no. I really respect that that you look at music from a very rounded point of view, where you're looking at the song and the craft of the song, and like what goes into making a song, and whereas a lot of people tend to drift into their specific parts that they play in a song. I really enjoyed talking to you about just like the idea of craft and do you consider yourself more of a songwriter than a guitarist?
No, I mean, I've always been a vocalist, guitarist, songwriter. I kind of do all three, I taught two of the guys in Incubus, which was since you're a 2000s guy, you know Incubus.
Incubus, I love
they
them.
had platinum albums, and I gave vocal lessons for a short time to Brandon, the lead singer, and then I taught the bass player Dirk Lance for quite a while. And then after Dirk left the group, he and I had a band together for about 9 years. It's called Willie's Nerve Clinic. You can look it up on streaming service and stuff if you want to hear that. But they were interesting, and when they got the deal, they did a couple of albums that were more, I would say, rap funk oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And Dirk, his real name is Alex. He would come and visit me, and he kind of, just because he was always very good in that respect. So he would come and he would tell me what they were doing and all that. And the first two albums they did okay. But he told me that they were still living on their advances. Wow. This was after two albums.
Mm-hmm.
And they made a Morning View, which had a Drive on it,
mm-hmm.
Which started them on their platinum run there for a couple of albums. And so it took them a little while there for the record company to get them going. But then finally they got a good following in LA and could pack a club like the Troubadour and stuff. And then they were off and running, but they had issues too. And so eventually Alex left, and that was when he came back. He even took some lessons from me again to work on music theory, because he was obviously a great bass player. Didn't need to teach him bass anymore.
Yeah.
But he had a hard time doing what he needed to do to really make progress with that. And so then we just decided to put a band together. So.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, but that was when things were still, there were still record labels, and it was a little more traditional. It was just a little bit after that Napster started to come in and things started to change.
Right.
And that's when Metallica got raked over the coals. Remember that? Because they said, hey, wait a minute here. And everybody was crapping on them because they said, well, you guys got millions of dollars. What do you care? And his whole point was, look, we just did a song for a movie. And before we've even gotten the mix out, it's out on Napster.
Yeah.
So we don't have control of our own music anymore.
Yeah.
And they got just raked over the coals until people like Dave Matthews and Sheryl Crow and some other people, rallied to their cause there.
Right.
But boy, they took a lot of grief for that. And
they
so
did.
it was not a good thing.
Yeah, and I know we're hitting our 2-hour mark here, so I'll let you go here in a bit. But we had another question from the chat that I wanted to ask you about before you go. Marianne wants to know if you're familiar with the Wrecking Crew.
Yes. As a matter of fact, the drummer was Hal Blaine. I had two run-ins with Hal. The first one, a buddy and I were out in California doing a recording session before I moved here. And the guy we were with knew Hal, and he called him one day, and because my friend that I was with was a drummer who loved Hal Blaine. And so he called over there, and it just happened to be one of those days where Hal felt like, okay, come over, I'll tell some stories and stuff. And so we went over to his house, and he sat there and told us about the Beatles and the Beach Boys and all this stuff he'd done. It was an amazing afternoon.
Yeah.
And then later on, when I was teaching, like 20 years later, I had a student of mine who his father was the engineer for Phil Spector when he did Be My Baby and all that stuff. I mean, You've Lost Love and Feel. Yeah, it was incredible. And he knew that Hal and a bunch of his cronies met at this restaurant down the street on Sunday mornings just to shoot the shit, So it was another. So Hal gave me this autographed picture, and he had a Wrecking Crew T-shirt on and all that stuff,
Wow.
So it was, but that was the studio days, and so I worked with the stuff I talked about before earlier in the interview. I was with the next generation of studio musicians. Those are some of the ones who played on Steely Dan records and all that. So those are the ones who came after the Wrecking Crew. Yeah. And then when they made that movie, which maybe your person there has seen it, of the Wrecking Crew, one of the guys, Tommy Tedesco, the guitar player, that's his son who made the movie. And for a while there, he had a hard time getting some funding, because what happens is there was a whole bunch of songs in the movie. because of the guys playing all this
Right,
stuff.
right.
Well, he had to get the rights to all that stuff, and it turns out it came to a whopping $300,000 he had to come up with to get the rights so he could then, show the movie commercially.
Wow.
And he eventually did. He got in, he included some stuff with Glenn Campbell, which was real nice because Glenn was very sick at that time. And speaking of great guitar players, and Glenn Campbell, that was an unbelievable guitar player. Of course, he had some great hits too, in singing, but yeah. So yes, I do know about the Wrecking Crew, and it's a great story.
And she is familiar with the movie. It's a great movie, she said.
Oh, good.
Chuck, I really, really appreciate you sitting down and giving us so much of your time. I'm sure you're a busy human being. So everybody who's in chat, make sure that you are clicking on these links to straydeuce.com and to all these links to his music. And and if you're listening on the audio end, make sure you go into the show notes and click around and support Chuck and what he's doing right now. Chuck, do you got anything? What do you got coming up? Do you got any releases coming up? You working on music? What do you got coming up?
Yeah, I have probably 3 more tunes already in the can, and that the video person, I'm working with them to put more up. So right now I'm just concentrating on that to get things up on social media. Right. And then probably put a band together and start playing them live.
There you go. Chuck, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much.
I'm glad that... Go ahead.
Take care, bud.
Yeah, you too, buddy. I'll talk to you. I'll be in touch about the audio release.